Okay, so for the interest of time, I think we're good to get started. It is 6:35 now, so we're going to keep rolling. And once Olivia's got a moment to pull the other screen back up, then we are going to keep going. It's always that darn loading bar, right? Alrighty, so here we go. Welcome everyone. My name's Siobhan. Thank you for joining us. Today we're working with ACORN, the Mohawk Students Association, and the McMaster Students Union. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then we're going to do some intros to get us started right off the bat. So the city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, the Neutral, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase from 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. We'd also like to recognize that due to the current online environment, you may be tuning in from all parts of Canada and the world. We recommend you learn more about the lands you reside on. For Canada, a useful tool is Our Native Land, and I'm going to just copy that into the chat now. And there we go. Moving on to why we're here. ACORN, the MSU, and the MSA have partnered today to host this workshop for some piloting. In December of 2018, Council voted for staff to develop a licensing pilot for student rentals in wards 1 and 8. Since then, there have been multiple delays, but the report is expected to come back to the August 10th Planning Committee meeting, and we want to make sure that tenant voices are heard at the upcoming meeting. Not only is Hamilton in a housing crisis with skyrocketing rents, but across the city, tenants are being forced to live in substandard conditions. ACORN, the MSU, and the MSA are calling on the city to protect all tenants in Hamilton. And moving into some introductions. Obviously, I've said that I'm Siobhan. I'm with the McMaster Students Union. I'm the Vice President Education for this year. With me, I have my Moon, who's the Associate Vice President of Municipal Affairs, and a number of other McMaster students as well. And with that, I'm going to toss it over to ACORN.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Siobhan. My name is Veronica, and I'm with ACORN. I'm the Mountain Chair. And we are a tenant and community union. We fight for social justice and financial justice at all levels of government. Our organization is coast to coast, from BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. We have 130,000 members across Canada. Here in Hamilton, we have 3 chapters: downtown, East End, and the Mountain. Locally, we have campaigns around affordable and livable housing. And now I'll pass it back to MSA for introduction. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm the Vice President of Internal Affairs from Mohawk's Student Association, also known as the MSA. It's a student association designed for and led by Mohawk students. It provides supports and resources, services for us to succeed academically and socially. So nice to meet you all, and hopefully have an awesome discussion here today.
Thanks so much, folks. So moving on to the agenda. First, we're going to have the MSA talking a bit about housing issues for Mohawk students. Then we're going to take over for the MSU and talk a bit about McMaster students' problems in the housing market. Then we're going to throw it back over to ACORN, and they're going to talk a bit more about Hamilton's market rental stock. And then we're going to go into municipal solutions, the history of landlord licensing in Hamilton, and what's happening at the upcoming planning committee meeting. Then finally, we're going to move into delegation training, and we're going to wrap up and take some next steps. Moving on into our Zoom rules. We might have noticed that everyone is muted, and that's just to avoid some background noise. That'll change once it's time for questions. This meeting is being recorded, and screenshots are going to be taken for our social media. So if you don't want to be in photos, just keep your video off. But on the other hand, we do encourage you to keep it on just for some face-to-face contact. Feel free to use the chat, but please keep posts related to the workshop, and please be respectful of other attendees. From there, I'm going to throw it over to MSA.
Okay, so speaking about housing issues, specifically for Mohawk College students, we want to think about the cost of rent and why that's important, quality of housing, and safety. So moreover, there's a relationship between these. While people aren't likely to lose out on safety, people may be willing to pay less for houses with less amenities, but then that's also going to be a little bit less safe, right? Choosing housing that seems safer at a higher price is often suggested. Next slide, please. So issues in student housing. So if you just look at the news, you'll see a lot of different articles that have been written in the past just relating to the safety and the lack of that. So Mohawk students live in various areas in Hamilton and in the surrounding regions, all over the world, really. As such, they are just as susceptible to poor living conditions as the next student. The following are a bunch of articles that relate to the quality of housing and safety concerns regarding student housing. So if you just take a look at any of those three articles, you'll see issues that have kind of popped up in the past. For example, you have a house that's supposed to be a family house with 12 bedrooms. That's not very safe. So yeah, things like that. And then there's issues with fire safety then too, right? So things to keep in mind there as well.
All right, thank you, Ruth, and I'll take over from there. From a more, I guess, Ward 1 stance, McMaster has a lot of the same problems that Mohawk does. I think the students are experiencing very similar problems. Some of those are definitely affordability compared to the quality of the home, and with that, the utilities being offered. Unresponsive landlords and property management. I think a lot of the times you see student homes that are in general in disrepair. They need a lot of work both inside and outside. And that kind of reflects on the communication between the tenants or the student tenants and the landlord. I think a lot of that results in a lack of safety precautions. So we hear a lot of reports about there not being working smoke detectors, maybe there are broken handrails going up the stairs, both inside and out, which is a huge accessibility need, and then door locks that aren't working. So that can be within the house, since a lot of times students aren't living with close friends or family. Just having that door lock makes people feel a lot safer. And then also having a high volume of people living in those shared spaces. So I think a minimum is usually around 4, and you hear about, like, similar to what Ruth mentioned, up to like 12 people living in one house. And obviously that's not something that we are advocating for. I think that becomes really unsafe at that point. Moving into the next slide. I'm going to be referencing a survey that the MSU conducted called Your City in 2021. And students really emphasize in that survey the importance of feeling safe within their rental unit. This is a key driver for where students are choosing to live, and aspects like overcrowding and adequate space are really contributing to it. On the right, there was a Toronto Star article that was published just this year talking about some student experiences that are really alarming. There's a link right below the screenshot if you want to check it out. Moving on to the next concern. In the same survey, a lot of students noted that affordability was very important, with $600 being the limit for a monthly rent. I think it's really interesting when you see that student rent is around $600, and then you also have around 6 people living in a unit. That really speaks to sort of the inability or the unwillingness for landlords to keep their properties in general upkeep and sort of do that maintenance. So as a result, the MSU has been supporting landlord licensing and property licensing for a number of years. And we really do believe that this is an effort to to preserve pre-existing units and maintain the affordable rental prices that we're seeing currently. Obviously, that's changing in the COVID-19 pandemic, but we do hope to maintain those affordable prices going into the future and kind of avoid going towards the high 600 range. And I'll flip over to my last slide. Just the next slide, please. Thank you. And then this one is just pointing out that McMaster students are noting the importance of accountability within the rental agreement. And this is speaking a lot about landlords that are both nice and responsive. I think being able to communicate open and honestly with your landlord and sort of talk about some of the issues without receiving sort of a lack of response, or even just someone being rude to some students that are renting for the first time. That's a big aspect for students who are selecting a house. And that was with 35% of members saying that aspect specifically was important, but with 70% of students suggesting that upkeep and maintenance were a key factor. This screen grab here is also just from another Hamilton Spectator article, and it's sort of talking about how there's a 6 to 8 bedroom house, and it's in general just repair, and these sorts of things are ongoing within student neighborhoods. So you kind of see the problems that students are facing with Ward 1. But with that, I am going to pass it over to the MSA.
Okay, so ACORN has graciously brought up to our attention ACORN housing issues in Hamilton and the surrounding area. So a big thing with ACORN is substandard housing. So landlords, they refuse to do the basic repairs. So whether that's a safety thing, like what was mentioned before, like even just a basic lock, inadequate, infrequent pest control, mold, broken appliances, dirty common areas, structural issues with balconies. You've got parking garage issues, and especially elevator shutdowns if someone is in a high rise. Those two are key, especially for people who have accessibility issues as well. So
I think pass back to Veronica.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. I'm just going to be covering about 2 big threats that on the Hamilton's affordable housing market. One of them is substandard housing, similar to the experience in student housing. Landlords are not doing basic repairs, pest control, and common area maintenance. This has been a significant impact on the health and well-being of tenants physically and mentally. Tenants are forced to stay home because they cannot afford to move. The second is displacement. We have renovation. So this is when a landlord claims they need all the tenants out to do a major renovation. The goal is to get the existing tenants out and new tenants in at a higher rent. The other one is demobition. When a landlord plans to demolish a building or part of the building and wants all the tenants out. Okay, these are predatory tactics that landlords use and are increasing homelessness, causing tenant displacement, and drives up rents in the neighborhood and destroys Hamilton's affordable housing stock. So I'm just going to discuss about what is the landlord licensing. And what we have now, so let's see, sorry guys. So what we have now, complaint-based system. Tenants have to call a bylaw to report if their landlord is not complying with the property standards. So current process, the bylaw does an inspection to the property unit within 10 days. If a violation is found, the bylaw officer can issue a voluntary compliance notice or an order right away. The landlord is given X number of weeks to comply. If still not compliance, the landlord is fined, and the city sends in their own contractors to do the work and puts the cost on the landlord's taxes. Councilors can put in a request for proactive inspection of a particular building. Bylaw officers go door to door asking tenants if they have concerns and leave door hanger with information in English and the business hours. The property standards and pest control are different departments. There's no proactive door-to-door inspections for pest issues. So why the current system is not working? Programs puts the burden on tenants to complain. Tenants need to know who to call, which requires internet access or phone. Tenants have to call multiple departments for issues. Public health is one of them for pest control, and bylaw for property standards. Any electrical safety, any electrical issues is the Electrical Safety Authority and the fire department for any fire safety concerns. Tenants fear repercussions of contacting bylaw. Landlords could relatively, I don't know this word. Tenants could have language barriers that prevent them from contacting bylaw. When the city does issue orders, it takes too long and fails to get results. Landlords aren't required to hire licensing professional contractors to do the repair of the work. Bylaw officers' dress code can be intimidating. If also responding to noise complaints, they dress like police officers with bulletproof vests. And currently we have no protections against renovictions or demovictions. And if Moon is still here, he will give you a student perspective.
Right. So if you put yourself in the student's shoes for a second, first of all, a lot of students are coming outside the municipality of Hamilton, whether they're from a different municipality like Toronto or something, or they're from a smaller city, or they've just never interacted with a municipality in their life. This is really intimidating, calling government office, etc. But you know, students can get past that. Then they're in the calls, they have to go to 5 different departments in order to get an answer. And then they're either told to wait, or they don't get an answer, or they give up. One thing you have to be familiar with is students just don't have a lot of time. A lot of us are working part-time jobs, and we have a full course load and all this type of thing. And finally, if a landlord or the bylaw officer or someone comes at you with, hey, section X of this bylaw, and they start throwing legal or industry jargon at you, there's no way for a student to understand that, right? Most of us aren't law professionals, and well, even a smaller percentage of that has knowledge in municipality and rental law. And so all of this sort of system is just broken, especially from a student perspective.
Great, thanks, Moon. So what is landlord licensing? Okay, landlords would pay a small fee per unit or the house to license their properties with the city. It's a proactive bylaw enforcement program that ensures landlords comply with the building maintenance standards. Many Hamilton businesses are licensed to protect the health and safety of customers and the public and ensure consistency. Like restaurants, hotel, payday loan, residential care facilities, hairdresser, tattoo shops, etc. These businesses have their own licenses, not just business license. An example of other cities with successful landlord licensing programs is Toronto. They have a rent safe, which covers 3 or more stories and 10 or more units for proactive property standards enforcement that was passed in 2017. If landlords do not comply with the maintenance standards in their rent safe Toronto team can issue orders and charge the landlords, which can result in substantial fines. The rent safe TO team will conduct inspections at every apartment building and at least once every 3 years based on scoring. Landlords have to comply with extensive list of health and safety items. Example, landlords required to have a tenant notification board, cleaning plan, capital plan, timeline for repair requests, and so on. In London, Ontario, they are approved by council in 2009, applies to rented single detached duplex, triplex, fourplex properties. Rental units in apartment buildings or townhouses are exempt. This bylaw was primarily meant to license student rentals. The property standards and fire are mandatory inspections for all residential rental unit licenses. And this year, London City Council voted to explore expanding the license to all rental buildings or houses. And in New Westminster, BC, the New Westminster has had landlord licensing since 2004. In 2019, New West added renovation protections to their landlord licensing program, the first of its kind in Canada. Landlords are required to keep their properties in good repair and restricted from renovating tenants. And just give you a little bit of history on landlord licensing in Hamilton. So landlord licensing has been proposed in Hamilton, has far back in 2013, but the city councilor have failed to take action. A subcommittee was set up in 2015 to look at landlord licensing, but scope was only on student rentals. In December 2018, council passed a motion directing staff to develop a pilot in wards 1 and 8 for landlord licensing and student rentals. Since 2018, ACORN has been advocating for citywide landlord licensing that would include high density rentals. And in April 2021, a motion was passed for the city to develop a comprehensive anti-renovation strategy that would include looking at Westminster's program. And that's it for me for the licensing, and I'll pass it back to Siobhan. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Veronica. Okay, so you may be wondering what's happening at the next planning committee meeting. And it's going to be that a staff report that has been delayed several times during the COVID-19 pandemic will be brought up on August 10th. Although info on the pilot is still pending, ACORN and the MSU have delegated before in 2018 in support of the pilot going ahead, but also called for the program to be citywide rather than just wards 1 and 8. We need as many student and tenants in other wards to delegate in support of landlord licensing. And although there is a chance it gets delayed, if delegates put their request and the date is moved, the request will be moved to the next meeting. And then I guess to the next slide. So there are the list of counselors, and just for a heads up, we need 4 votes to pass the motion. So I think we've got a good shot, but I'm going to pass it over to Ruth.
Thanks. All right, so what is delegation? That's the big reason why we're here tonight. So a delegation is our opportunity to let our elected officials know our opinions on issues or motions that they are discussing. So it gives us a little bit of power to enact change. During the time before COVID-19, delegations were done in person. Now we have the opportunity to submit a pre-recorded video or delegate virtually during the meeting. And for this, you have a total of 5 minutes. So not a ton of time, but enough to get your voice out there. So why is it important to delegate? So city councilors are ultimately responsible to those who have elected them, and that is us, right? So hearing from members of the public gives them another way in which to view a particular issue, and it shows how many people are also affected by the issues, right? We've voted them in, and they're there for us to have our voices heard, right? Delegating to the councilors or the mayor or a committee lets them have an opportunity to discuss our experience and how the decisions they are making could directly affect us or the people they represent, right? So without hearing from you, councilors can only depend on staff reports and their own experiences. And this can often be very difficult or different from your own lived reality. So there's that. And what to talk about. Okay, so that's the big thing here too. So we have 5 minutes. So either if you're a quick talker, you can get a lot in. If you're not, you've got plenty of time. But 5 minutes is the 5 minute mark. So focus on core points that you want to get across, and you just work from there. So it can be easiest and most effective to tell your own personal story. That carries a lot of weight, personal experience. And don't worry about presenting facts and figures. This is your own time to convey what you value and what you want, not really what someone else wants. This is about you, right? And we want council to prioritize. So that's a big thing for us here tonight. All right, and I'll pass it back to Siobhan.
Perfect. Thank you, Ruth. So for the first step, it's going to be how to register. And that, just a quick reminder, that is August 10th for the planning committee meeting. But your options for delegating are going to be either a written submission, a pre-recorded video, or a live delegation. And for that, you're going to need to have access to the internet and to be available from 9 a.m. onwards. And then we'll jump to the next slide. So there's where to register, and then there's the link. You're going to be able to submit your request, and you're going to go through the steps that you can kind of see on the slide or on the screen with those little graphics there. You're just going to fill out your information and what you're going to want to present. And then going on to how to register, it's going to be, if you're submitting a written or a pre-recorded delegation, you need to make sure to say that in your request. You're going to need to say your reason to delegate, and that's going to be to speak on the landlord licensing pilot for student rentals in Hamilton. You're going to need to email the clerk, so that's clerk@hamilton.ca, a copy of the written and or video delegation by the deadline, and that's the day before at noon, although it's always best to do that a bit beforehand. For all requests, you're going to receive an email right away confirming your request, and then another email with how to join the meeting if you're doing a live delegation, and that's August 10th at 9 a.m. And finally, council meetings are done on the WebEx platform, so it's very similar to Zoom. And then what to expect when you're there on the day of or virtually there. If you're doing a live delegation, they're going to cut you off at the 5 minute mark, like Ruth mentioned. So make sure you practice ahead of time, make sure you time yourself so you don't get cut off. If you are doing that delegation live, the finalized agenda with a list of delegation requests won't be available till late on August 9th. You'll be able to see what time you're doing or what number you're doing it. Sorry, you don't know what time, but you do know what order. For pre-recorded delegations, those are always played at the very end, and counselors may ask you a question or what to say. Counselors may ask you a question, but if you don't know how to say, or if it's not relevant, you can say something along the lines of, I can only speak to my experience, or great question, ACORN, Mohawk, or McMaster can follow up on that with you. Okay, so what to expect while the landlords are delegating. So last time there were 18 landlords that delegated in December of 2018. The Hamilton Landlord Lobby has started a petition against licensing and has held a town hall in June to organize its members for the upcoming planning committee. So they will be there. And what to expect. So this is something that a landlord might say, you never know, but it's possible. So they might say something along the lines of rent will go up. Hamilton rents are already going up. That's not necessarily a valid concern for them to be bringing up now. Additionally, Ontario does have rent control with the exception of suites first occupied after November of 2018. Landlords in Ontario can apply for an above guideline increase, but only for a major capital network or capital work not to cover a small license fee. For student rentals, costs would break down to $200 annually to the landlord per property. So that's around $1,660 a month divided by all the students living in that house. If the landlord wanted to add the cost back to the license fee onto the rent, that's also a possibility, but in other cities with licensing, there was no noticeable difference in rent between houses of licensed and non-licensed. Another thing that might be brought up is licensing will lead to a shortage of housing supply, and that's potentially not true. Maintaining residential apartments and houses will actually help preserve supply by ensuring landlords are keeping their properties in good repair and disincentivizing rent eviction. So there's no evidence in other cities that landlords or that there's a decrease in housing supply. In other cities, landlords have accepted the new policy and moved on. For the third one, tenant displacements if landlords lose their license. So it's kind of up to the city what the purpose of the program is. The idea isn't to take away a landlord's license, it's to make sure the properties are healthy and safe for tenants. In New Westminster, BC, the tool was used to protect tenants from displacement. And fourth, it won't change anything, just red tape. So right now the complaint-based system isn't working. Hamilton needs a strong and proactive enforcement of property standards. Okay, and then with that, we're moving into our Q&A. I'm not sure, maybe